Hello everybody, it's Tim here again, this time with another script review. I'm kind of having fun reviewing these scripts, so I figured, fuck it, why not do another one? This time this is for, there was two scripts written for a potential 2017 Friday the 13th reboot. And the idea was pretty much canned after the movie Rings, I believe, underperformed, which was not a very good film, which is weird because the audience for Rings is not the same audience for Friday the 13th film, despite the fact that they're both horror flicks, so that was kind of stupid in my opinion. But this script was written by Aaron, I do not know how to pronounce this dude's last name. I believe it's the dude that wrote the movie Prisoners. I think it's Guzikowski. I'm not sure how to say the dude's last name, honestly. But this script was very interesting. There was two scripts written. The other one was by this guy named Anton or something like that. I forget the other dude's name. I also have it. I'll review that one eventually. But yeah, this one from the dude I believe who did Prisoners. It's interesting. I've heard some people really hate this one, and I've heard other people like this one. For me, I'm kind of in the middle on it. If it was just like a random Friday the 13th story, maybe like a random comic or something, I think it would be ultimately good but not great as a Friday the 13th movie, looking at it as from a script format. And keep in mind, I'm someone who's a big Friday the 13th fan. Like, I can ultimately enjoy pretty much any of the films for what they are. Friday the 13th is a franchise that was it's not really planned out at all. It's just made basically for money. They're event films, lowbrow B-movie slasher flicks. That's all they are, and that's all they wanted to be. And I enjoy them for that. And even the ones that aren't as good or go a completely different path, like Jason Goes to Hell, I can still enjoy for what they are. So with this script, thinking of it as a movie, ultimately it was all right. It's not awful, but it's not good either. It's split into like three parts, pretty much, to where there's three killers, which I get it. You want to be ambitious with it. I can understand where the writer is coming from, but some of it is not explained very well, and then some of it does work. I like the fact that in the script that they pulled names of characters from like the first like maybe 1 through 4 movies. Like the main character of the script is a girl called Annie, which is obviously taken from the character named Annie from the first film, who's the girl I believe who was killed by Mrs. Voorhees in the Jeep in the woods when she got her throat slit. And you got other two characters named Jeff and Sandra, who are the opening kills of the movie. Our script, I mean, who are killed by Jason's father, Elias. I like that they keep the canon name Elias because that's Jason's father's name that's introduced in Jason Goes to Hell. And Jason's father kills him with the sack over his head. So it's the return of the sack, which I did kind of like. Um, Elias kills him, and then he also kills like these other asshole type people working at the camp too, which I kind of liked. But it never. But Elias, and what I'm getting at is problems with it is Elias in the script. He's just crazy. Like he knows Jason's going to be evil somehow psychically, and he hates and resents his son because of that, because he somehow psychically knows what his son's going to grow up to be and become. It doesn't really make any sense. It is never explained at all. Even to the end of the script, it's not explained. Sorry, I got something in my eye here, or eyes. But yeah, it's never explained at all how the hell he knows any of this shit. And then that's my biggest problem with it. I do like the fact that he uses the sack to kill the opening kill of the two teens or whatever. I did kind of like that, and I like the flashback stuff the first act stuff of little Jason, how he's walking around wearing kind of like this breathing mask. And I like some of the stuff with like interactions with Pamela. I like how she's like a more fleshed out character here, where she's like working there at the camp and everything, and she's talking to the Annie character about Jason, saying that little Jason is smarter than what people think he is. He knows this area very well. He grew up here. So yeah, it's obviously going with the idea and that he knows the area so well, so he's able to sneak up on people and shit and everything when he becomes a killer. I like that. And what happens to Jason and everything is kind of sad, and I think it ultimately does kind of work in a tragic way in the script, where the Annie girl is supposed to like take him out for swimming lessons, and you see Jason start to bond with her, and it seems like he actually does like her. And he actually bruises her arm because he's starting to drown by accident, and he like grabs a hold of her to like get pulled out, and he sees he bruises her and hurt her, and you can tell in the script that Jason feels kind of bad about that. Little Jason does. But ultimately what happens is there's this asshole dude who shows up. I believe it's supposed to be her boyfriend. I think the character's name may have been Barry. But he wants to like take Jason out on the boat, and little Jason wants to go on the boat, but once he like takes him out or whatever, they're all tripping on acid or shrooms and drugs and shit. And he grabs Jason's like mask, his medicine mask or asthmatic type mask or whatever that he wears. and he like pulls it off, and Jason doesn't want anyone to see his face, so he takes off running into the woods, ashamed of the way he looks because he doesn't want anyone to see it. And ultimately you find out that he got into the water and he was trying to get off this little island that they were on and get back to his mom, basically, and potentially drowned in the lake. So yeah, definitely sad. Asshole counselors caused his death. So yeah, definitely sad. But the character Annie, I will say, is the only sympathetic one in the script. She gets the most development. Her sister is even kind of a bitch. But throughout the script, she starts to like bond with her sister more, which I kind of liked. And all the character development goes to those two, other than like Mrs. Voorhees and all that. And that's what I'm saying. Ultimately, Jason's dad, Elias, who's the first killer, he ends up getting killed by Mrs. Voorhees because she ends up thinking that he's the one that killed Jason because he was abusive to Jason, we find out. And he was the reason that Jason was deformed because basically he used to beat Pamela when she was pregnant because he didn't want Jason to be born because he somehow psychically knew that Jason was going to turn out evil. Once again, that's never explained, and that is the weakest part of the script. And so after Pamela kills him, thinking he's the one that ultimately killed Jason, then we get Pamela as the killer, who's crazy now because she finds like footage that was recorded by the boyfriend or whatever who pulled off Jason's mask that shows Jason running off into the woods or whatever, and she ultimately, realizes, they did it. So she tries to take revenge on them and everything. This is when we get our second killer, and so she starts taking all them out, and she kills a bunch of them. Which it's some kind of, there's some alright deaths here, or okay deaths in terms of the script. And I do like the fact that we're getting more Pamela and more of her being developed and how she's crazy as shit now. And she's like thinking Jason's talking to her or whatever because she wants revenge for her, deformed son who has died unjustly. And so she starts trying to take them all out. And you actually get a call back to the first movie where she's like, they can't hide, no place to hide, which is what, Betsy Palmer said is Mrs. Voorhees in the original film. And she's like on a boat and like driving around and shit, like trying to spotlight them and everything, or trying to find them. And then you get to the end where she gets her head chopped off, just like the original movie by the main girl. I believe it's Annie who does it in the script. And then after that, they think everything's okay. Then shit, Jason shows up as the killer. And so now we get our third killer. And I will say, having 3 killers does kind of hurt it. If they would have, because it makes the script feel, it makes it feel, what's the word I'm looking for? It just makes it feel like there's too much going on. Like there's just too much. Like this felt like a longer read than what it is because it just felt like there's too much going on. Like this almost feels like something that would work better as like a Friday 13th TV series, or a one-off like season of something, of a Friday show or something, instead of a Friday movie. You get what I'm saying? Like, I like the idea of even having Elias as a killer or whatever in this potential reboot, but it's just never explained why he's crazy. There's no explanation. He's just crazy. Yeah, and that really weakens it. I think it would have worked better if Elias was just not a killer, and if it was just, maybe if he did have the sack on or whatever, and he was abusive to Jason. That's where Jason got the idea to wear the sack. And when Jason shows up as the actual killer, he is wearing a hockey mask in the script. And if he was just abusive to Jason and like maybe he's the one that put the mask on, Jason's head or whatever, because he was ashamed of the way his son looked, and ultimately Pamela killed him because of that, eventually, because she just couldn't take it anymore. Because that would help keep Jason and like the mom sympathetic and everything, and explain why, Jason never really gave a shit about his father because his father was an abusive prick. Or you could write it that the dad was a good man who ultimately, after the son drowned, he just couldn't deal with the fact that his wife was losing it, and so he had to leave. Or she drove him away, through her madness, pushed him away. You could do that as well. Either one of those, I think, would work better than having him as the killer, at least in terms of this script, or a killer in terms of this script, because it's just not explained why he's a killer. There's no explanation whatsoever. He's just crazy. And that's the worst part of the script. Then we get time with Jason at the end, and he starts, hacking, slashing, and kicking ass. And I will say, ultimately, it was kind of fun to have Jason once again as the killer in the script, finally. But I will say it's also weakened by the fact of they state outright, the Andy character does it. Well, he didn't drown. He survived and has just been living in the woods. And now he's back as an adult. Well, that doesn't really make sense, because if he would have survived, which I know is something that was hinted at in the original Friday the 13th Part 2, but the later films ignored that and just went with the idea that he always drowned, and just came back from the dead, which just makes more logical horror movie sense than the fact that he would have just survived in the woods and never went to find his mom. Like, that never made that much logical sense. It's more believable and more understandable if Jason did just die and he just came back from the dead to seek revenge. That makes way more sense. But so Jason's trying to kill everybody at the end, and ultimately he does. Sorry, the Annie girl, like the main character Annie, she sacrificed herself to save her sister at the end by like luring Jason away using this bell or whatever that Mrs. Voorhees had whenever she wanted to call for Jason when he was in the woods looking around and playing or whatever. And so she uses it at the end to distract him while her sister can kind of try to get away. And Jason doesn't die at the end of the script. Pretty much the other sister, the Annie character, dies from her wounds where she gets wounded by Jason. And then the other sister, who was kind of the bitch but starts to develop into a better person by the end, or a slightly better person. Like her and Annie, the two sisters, they get pretty much all the development. And she gets away at the end and makes it to like the other camp or whatever called Packanack, which is a reference to part 2, which I appreciated. And the authorities and everybody come there, and Jason's not there or anything, but they hear like this bell noise out in the woods, and they go out there, and in the woods you see Mrs. Voorhees' head like put up like kind of like an altar, obviously a callback to part 2 where she's in between these two trees and the bell thing is kind of like hanging there or whatever, and the wind's like hitting it, knocking it back and forth, where Jason, he's still around, so it's kind of a spooky ending, and the mom is like, exalted or whatever above everything because he loved his mom because she was the only one that showed him 100% compassion. So yeah, overall, this would have been like an alright Friday the 13th movie in my opinion. I wouldn't have hated it. Some people online absolutely hated this because, well, it's Friday the 13th movie, you want Jason. You don't really want like 2 other killers or whatever that much before you finally get to Jason and everything. I get it, but part of me does kind of like the ambition of it with trying to do more or whatever with the property. Like, I'm open-minded when it comes to Friday the 13th, like, because most of the movies are just the same thing, and I love them for that, but they are. And so when they want to do something somewhat different or whatever, I'm more forgiving of that than probably other hardcore fans are. Even though I am a hardcore fan, I'm more open with that kind of stuff. I'm not saying you should just go wild with it and have Jason like in a musical or something, although that could be funny, could be entertaining in its own right. But at the same time, I do appreciate that they did try to do a little more here, but it's just not all justified in it, and it just kind of ends on a whimper, I mean, because you want a little bit more Jason action, you want a little bit more oomph at the end. But as it is, this was all right. Like, if this was a movie, I'd give it like a 2.5 stars out of 4. It'd be all right. I would ultimately probably say I liked it as like, I liked it if it was a movie, but didn't like it. It wouldn't be a Friday the 13th I'd want to watch all the time. I would honestly feel like the 2009 reboot was better than this, which I've kind of warmed to that one. The 2009 reboot I used to think was just kind of meh. Watching it now, I actually think it's good. And I think the reason I kind of like the reboot now is because really, when you watch it, it's really not a reboot of Friday the 13th. It's really just another standalone Jason movie. It could honestly easily just be another Friday the 13th movie and part of the regular series that just took place in a regular or just a random part of the timeline, really. And I think that's why I like it. If I was to review that now, I'd probably give it a 3 out of 4. Ultimately, it was a good, fine Jason flick. But yeah, this would have been weaker than that one. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you again.